Hello everyone, my name's Mark and I'm the psychology teacher at Ada College. I've been teaching at Ada College now for around 18 months, but I've taught psychology for over 20 years. I've taught in a variety of different colleges and I can honestly say Ada's the best one. I've also had experience in exam marking, doing one-to-one tutoring, small group seminars. I've worked with a variety of different students with various needs. I've also taught our religious studies, sociology, health and social care, medical technology, communications and culture. I could go on. There's a lot in there. So in a moment, I'm going to explain to you what psychology is and why it's important to your career. We're going to look at a particular theory used to explain memory, and I'm going to give you the chance to do a few experiments. So please have a pen and paper ready to write things down. But don't worry, you don't have to tell anyone your responses. The session's going to last about 40 minutes, and at the end, hopefully we'll have a chance to answer some questions. Psychology is two words together, psych meaning mind and ology meaning study of. So it's the study of the mind. I've written down a few words for you just to take away with you and think about that I think are quite important to the study of the mind. The first thing, of course, is the brain being the seat of the mind. And so everything you think, all your aspirations, everything you are is located in that little jelly mass within your skull. We also got to think about science as well. Science is how we come about knowing stuff now. So how we actually understand the world is through science, is through verifiable evidence, not our own opinion necessarily, and not what we think and what we've read on Facebook, but through an actual carefully constructed experiment. Psychologists are particularly interested in three things. First thing is behavior. Behavior is really important because it shows us sometimes what we're really about. Take, for example, somebody who you might think has romantic interests in someone else. So a friend of yours, you think they like someone else. You ask them, they say, no, I don't like that person. But then you notice they're always looking at their phone for texts from them. That's their behavior. That tells you. We also think about thinking. Thinking is really important as well. The way that our thoughts are constructed, where do we get them from? And what happens if we're thinking the wrong things? And who's to tell us we're thinking the wrong things? But how does that direct our behavior? And tied in with all this is the emotion of our lives. We have an emotion. We are an emotional being. It does help guide us in certain situations and can save our lives in some ways if we're angry or frightened, for example, to get away from something. But emotion is really important. It's tied into thinking and behaviour. And finally, I'm just going to put these two things down: mental health and psychopathology. Um, Psychology is there to help people. Essentially, we are there to kind of understand people and offer them some solutions or offer them guidance or support and to make the world a better place, I guess. Okay, so I was going to talk quickly to you about what psychology might have to do with your program study. So we're going to look at computing. So what does it have to do with computing? The first major thing is this: we need to understand how people interact with computers, with technology. How do people respond to it? How the best way to navigate your way through a software program, for example. Secondly, tied into that, I guess, is this gaming. Psychology and gaming are very important. We need to understand how people respond to visual and auditory information, and how they are engaged emotionally in a game. So a game like a war game, like you can see on the picture there, has a high emotional link to it. Of course, we have other games that are kind of more just strategy involved, and Minecraft is a good game for children to build things, and they enjoy immersing themselves into a world of blocks there. Also, we've got to think about social media, very important issue these days, how people seem to be very engaged in it, and especially over the last few months or so, where people have been socially distant, so it's been very useful. But of course, psychology has a lot to do with that. I've put this in. This is advertising. I think with technology, use of technology these days, and how adverts are constructed and made for us in a way, psychologists are always involved in creating those. And finally, I'm going to think about artificial intelligence. Of course, to make an artificial intelligence, you're effectively making a brain within a computer. And that's really interesting to psychologists, and also psychologists can help out with the um, difficulties of achieving that. You should be aware that we are using the AQA exam board. So if you were ever interested in finding out more details from what I'm going to tell you now, there is a link down there, and you can just Google AQA psychology and it will take you straight to the exam board website. There are a variety of things that we study in A-level psychology, and I'm going to go through each one of them with you now. First thing I'm going to talk about, no particular order, is this picture depicting something. It's depicting a card game. And the good thing, you can be good at these games if you can remember the cards that have been given out already. So one of the things we look at is memory. We're going to look at that a little bit today. Okay, so another topic we study is depicted by this picture here. This, of course, is a picture from a recent protest on the Black Lives Matter issue. And we're going to look a little bit about how this sort of thing happens. And of course, the recent months we've had with social distancing and lockdown, it's interesting how the population actually conforms and obeys orders that are given to them. And sometimes they don't, and we look at the reasons for that. So that's quite an interesting topical issue to look at. We also look at a thing called attachment. Some psychologists think this is absolutely important. So, how a child bonds to its parents, the role of fathers, for example, in attachment theory, very important. We look at that in particular detail. Another thing we look at is neuroscience, and the idea here, of course, is that we need to be able to understand the brain itself and what particular parts of the brain does and what's the action of certain hormones and drugs and damage to the brain and how that can cause problems for people. We also look at relationships, what the purpose of them is, why are heterosexual relationships normally the norm, what the process is behind different sexualities and different ways of approaching relationships, and also the cultural significance of marriage is discussed in that topic. And we look at aggression. So we look at the role of aggression. If aggression can be pro-social, if it can be a positive thing, maybe is it not always negative? In fact, we see that often in sport. And of course, we look at psychopathology, as I mentioned earlier. So we look at what happens to people when they actually go into an area, if you like, of behaviour that is not serving anyone any favours. And finally, other mental health issues we look at are schizophrenia, OCDs, phobias, and depression. You may have heard of some of these things, but they're quite, schizophrenia particularly is quite a difficult one to get involved in and get to understand. But OCDs and phobias and depression, you've probably come across those before. But we look at why they're caused and what we can do to help with them. And a final note on really the exam at the end of your 2 years. So the assessment in psychology. Now, obviously, as a college, we will assess you as we go through the course. So you'll have regular assessments that will be based on exam-style questions from the exam board that we use. But right at the end, for your actual qualification and your grade, you will be given 3 exams in May and June of your ending year. So it'll be after the end of a 2-year course. The exam papers are all 2 hours long. They're roughly weighted the same, but they have the different topics I've just explained to you spread across them. Within them all, though, there is a thing called research methods, and I've put that embedded into the course. That's something we have to discuss within the teaching of psychology. So we're looking at how the psychologists actually get their information from people and what the problems of doing that are. So that's a bit of a technical thing, but you'll become aware of it when you do the course. So we're going to start doing a little bit about memory now. So this is a topic within psychology. It's a little snippet of what we do in the actual lesson. So the topic we're going to look at is memory today, and we're going to look at a particular model of memory, and you're going to have a go at doing a few memory tests for me. First of all, just wanted to sort of think about what memory actually is, and this is quite a nice but fairly lengthy explanation of what it is. You might want to just quickly read that. What I would say to you though is the important thing about memory, it is a storage, like a computer has a storage of memory. Your brain has a storage, but it also has to have a retrieval mechanism. So you do have to know what's in your brain, in your storage, to prove that you have the memory, if you like. And I like this quote as well. This is from a film, so it's not a psychologist who said this, but it's quite an interesting thing to think about how memories, all your memories that you have could be distorted. They could be interpretations. They're not an actual record. Memories are not really photographic in that sense. So, you know, we'd like to think of photographic memory, but it's not quite like that in this sense. So a quick question to you. You don't have to draw it, but some people have done it already. But the Starbucks logo, we all know that, don't we? We know what it looks like. It's, hang on a minute, I can't remember. Let's have a look. There it is. There's the Starbucks logo. Now, we know it when we see it. And when I asked you just before you saw it, you had this sort of that image in your head, I bet. We asked some people to draw the Starbucks image, and this is what some of them came up with. Terrible, aren't they? But that's in their heads as what the Starbucks image is. But when they see the Starbucks image, they do know it. Our memory is not that great, is it? And I just want to mention very quickly that memories aren't just about remembering a picture of some kind. They are all sorts of things. So just be aware of this. You know, you have a memory for a procedure that you might do. You have a memory for something you can declare about yourself or a thing or a fact. You have autobiographical memory, so you know your life story. You have what's known as semantic memories, which mean that you have meanings to each of your memories. They are personal to you. But some things you might remember about a situation, your friend won't, because your meaning to the situation is different. And finally, we have this thing called eidetic memory, which is what people normally term as photographic memory. That's very rare in people to have a very strong photographic memory. Normally, we have an interpretive memory. Okay, you can pause the video now just to have a think about this. But could you state two facts about yourself and just pause the video here, have a look and see what you think there. And this is an example of a declarative memory, something that people can declare about them, not about themselves, but about something. It's the pi formula for 1,000 places. Now, no one's going to be able to remember 1,000 places. We normally remember 3 or 4 for pi, but there is a person in the world that can remember this at 10,000 places. So that would be what you're looking at now times 100. And you can pause the clip now as well, just to have a think about this. Think of an early memory. You know, you don't have to tell us about it, but you just think about your childhood. Pause the video now and have a think. And this is really looking at how memories do decay over time. So your childhood memories are largely gone. And the reason for that, of course, is time. And finally, you can think about a semantic memory. I don't need you to do this right now, but think about you think about a film you last saw, or the last film you saw, your recollection of it will be shorter. You will leave details out. You forget bits, but you do remember the interesting bits, the exciting, scary bits. Okay, this is the first experiment of the day. It's an experiment about words and your ability to remember certain words. In a moment, you're going to see at the top of the screen a list of words, one after another. You'll understand each word because they're all concrete nouns. Your job is to remember them. Now then, you should have a pen and paper at the ready, but don't write anything down until the end of the list of words has been seen. I'll tell you when to write them down. This is not a competition. You do not have to tell me your answers. It doesn't matter if you don't remember many words, it's fine, but you'll understand what you did in light of what I tell you at the end. Okay then, so without further ado, I guess we should start. Here come the words. Okay, that's the end of the list. Right then, you have 1 minute to write down all the words that you remember. Any order you like, but write them down. Okay, let's have a look and see what words you remembered. You're probably eager to find out what you did remember, what you forgot. You'll see there's the list of words in the order that you saw them. There were 20 words in total. Normally people remember around 8 or 9 words. That's, pretty good. If you remembered more, great, good for you. If you didn't remember as many as that, and maybe only remembered a few, there's not a problem either. That's just because some people just don't like or cannot find it. They find it very difficult to process words, especially when they appear in that sort of format. So don't feel that you've got something wrong with you in any way. But let's have a look at the words anyway and see what's what here. Have a quick moment to sort of count up how many you remembered, and also it was interesting to see if you remembered anything that wasn't on the list. That can happen. But let's have a look. There's the first 3 words I'm quite interested in, and most of you would have remembered the first, maybe the second word. And of course, the reason for that is that you were able to rehearse those words before all the others came in and filled up your mind. The other thing is some of you would have remembered the last word, 3 words, maybe the last word, because it was the last one. It was fresh in your mind as you wrote down. And of course, there's a word in there that's a bit unusual, aardvark. What's that doing in there? It doesn't seem right compared to all the other words there, which are all pretty basic. And don't have so much kind of unusual characteristics about them. So have a look and see what you think there. But that tends to be what we do. We remember the first and last words. The first word, the words that we remember, is known as the primacy effect. And the last words are known as the recency effect. So here we have with the fact that you remember things at the beginning of a list and sometimes things at the end of a list. It gives rise to this theory or this idea of the serial position effect. And this is where you'll see there, if we were to count up all your words that you record, all of you, we'd see a frequency. So the more people would remember the first words in the list at the beginning, there's the first three words there. They would also remember, people would also tend to remember the last words as well. So that's the recency effect, the most recent bit of information. And in the middle, of course, we've got the unusual words, like in this case, it was aardvark. This is a bit like how you remember a film, isn't it? Or a book, or something, or a situation you've been in. You can sort of remember the beginning of it and the end of it, of course, the dramatic end of a film. And you might remember something unusual in the middle, but all the other bits around the other parts of the list, tends to get forgotten. Okay, so we're going to try and explain this theory using a model of memory, which is known as the multi-store model. And the multi-store model proposes this idea that your brain or your mind has three separate stores or three separate units that code information and code memories. First of all, we've got to imagine that information's coming in. Something has got to be noticed. So your brain kind of picks up on something and it senses it, and therefore it pays attention to it. Now that happens very quickly. Now imagine this: you're in a crowded situation and you're chatting to some people you know, and some other people you know nearby who you're not listening to their conversation, but they mention your name. And what happens is your brain picks up on that, and suddenly you're attending to what they're saying, not what your friends who you're talking to are saying. That makes sense. It's called the cocktail party phenomenon. Very strange name, but that's really what we're getting at here. So your senses pick up on something. Then very quickly you start attending to it and you start thinking about what's being said. In the words you just did, you're processing them, you're rehearsing them, and you're putting them in those words into long-term memory. So the first word on that list, pray, is probably still in your long-term memory, but it's in there ready to be accessed. So the short-term store is really what you're thinking, how you're processing the information, and it does it in a very basic way. You rehearse information. So your rehearsal, you have what's known as a rehearsal loop. So when you're trying to memorize something or trying to think of something, the words, for instance, the list, you're rehearsing, you're saying tray, desk, and so on. And that's a rehearsal that gets into your long-term memory. If you don't rehearse it enough, so all the words in the middle of the list don't get rehearsed enough, apart from aardvark maybe. Aardvark did get rehearsed because it's like, oh, what's that there? Why am I seeing that? What's aardvark doing? And you're rehearsing it. If it doesn't get rehearsed, it gets forgotten. And this is really interesting, I think, and I'll just leave this thought with you. Look at that, the long-term store. If something's in there, if memories are in there, the argument is they will never go. But then you think, well, I don't remember everything in my life. Where's it all gone? Well, it's not gone anywhere. It's there somewhere. You just haven't been able to access it yet. So, of course, rehearsing information is really important, how we remember things. And you could argue here that, your passwords that you have for certain systems that you might be engaged in, they are rehearsed. If you want to remember, what we normally do, of course, is write them down and rehearse them then and keep them somewhere so that we know it's not a very safe way of doing it, but that's kind of what we tend to do. Of course, we remember the passwords that we use of places that we use regular, so our our PIN code is usually well remembered because it's something we use frequently. Of course, working out the way of a route to, say, school or college is quite a useful thing to do as well in rehearsal. So, when you first go to a place, it seems oh, I'm not sure where to go, and you're working it out, and you do it once or twice, and you keep going over it, and suddenly it's just like, it doesn't matter. I'll get there because it's very much so in my memory how to get there. And there's a little circle around Ada College there. This map, actually, if you're wondering, is an old map from about 130 years ago, and that's why you might notice that there's some areas of North London there that are not actually got any houses on yet. Of course, people as well. Lots of people we know through life. The faces that we see are the ones we see regularly, the ones we rehearse, are the ones that remain familiar to us. When we stop rehearsing them, They might still be in our long-term memory, but we kind of forget people as we go through life.
Okay, it's time for the second experiment now. Now we're going to look at pictures. The pictures are going to appear on the screen, one after the other. They're going to appear quite quickly. I can't stop the pictures halfway through. If you miss it, you miss it. But try to keep your eyes on the screen and try to focus. Of course, your job again is to remember all the pictures you can. Have your pen and paper ready, but don't write anything down. We're not going to take your individual scores in, and it's private and confidential, and it doesn't matter if you don't remember many pictures, that's fine. Again, I'll explain at the end what it all means. Okay, so this was not about you memorizing pictures. This was about something else. Here's some questions for you. Have a think about these, see if you can answer them. So you might want to pause the video here just to have a quick look and think, and the answers are coming up right now. So it would seem that if you got the right cue, the right prompt, you can actually recall almost anything. Well, give or take. With pictures, it's a bit easier. So well done if you got some of those correct, those questions correct, and don't worry if you got some of them wrong or couldn't remember. But it just shows you that given the right prompt, you can remember almost anything. Anyway, we're going to do the last experiment now. Okay, this is experiment number 3 now. You're going to see a lot of pictures, many pictures, and you probably feel a little bit overwhelmed, but again, the same rules apply. Don't worry about it. It's all confidential. Just see how you can do, and I'll tell you what you do at the end. Okay, pens down, get ready. That was a lot of pictures there, wasn't it? And you're probably wondering now, he's not really going to get us to remember all those, is he? No, I'm not. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a pair of pictures. One of them was in the list you saw, one of them wasn't. Your job is to pick out which one was in the list you saw, which you just seen, and which one wasn't. Pretty straightforward. Let's give it a go. Okay, so here's the first pair. It's the owl or the strange-looking owl. Which one do you think was the correct picture? Let's take a moment to think. You should be able to guess which one you've just seen. Is it A or B?
It's a mystery to me. The game commences for the usual fee, plus expenses, confidential information. It's in a diary. This is my investigation. It's not a public inquiry. I go checking out the reports, digging up the dirt. You get to meet all sorts.
This neatly brings us on to the end, really. I always like to leave a couple of questions for you to think about, and these are the questions. I think you should have a think about this yourself. Is your memory everything you know about yourself? You could ask other people this as well. Think about what you've learned today and maybe put it into your conversations. Also, quite a big question now, how do you know your memory is true? You could ask somebody if your memory was true, but how do they remember it the way you do? So it's impossible to really answer that question, but we can have an idea about it. And then just before we go, I think we'll just have a quick look at some words from one of our old students. And just a quick thing to say to you about textbooks as well. Do have a think about buying a textbook or getting hold of a textbook before you start the course. We have a couple of textbooks that we do give students in the classroom that they can take home. These are popularly known as the green-haired and the pink-haired girl textbooks, but there are others around. As long as they've got the AQA accreditation, that'll be brilliant. But even if you've got a textbook that isn't AQA accredited, it can be useful, but let me know if you do that. So that's all for today then. Thank you for listening. Thank you for engaging in the session. I hope you learned something today. If you've got any other questions you want to ask, feel free to email me in the contact details below. Of course, you could get in touch with the college as well to find out a little bit more about the course and how it relates to your other program of study. Thanks and bye-bye.